Hey guys, how's it going? So this is my Valorous RTA tier list. The recent season is basically about to end when I'm making this, and I think I have a decent grasp on what's pretty good, what's pretty bad. I've played a lot of games, and I've seen a lot of better players than me play a lot of games. I've also watched a lot of the World Cup, and even though it's not the exact same as the meta that everyone else plays, it still pretty much represents what's strong and what's not. You might disagree with some of the things on here, and that is totally fine. You can leave a comment about how I'm totally wrong, and that's okay. I might give you a reason as to why I think I'm correct, though. But I set up the tiers like this: Insane, Great, Good, Niche, Bleh, Garbaggio. And let me start at Insane, and we move down. So these are the characters that essentially dictate the meta. They are picked non-stop, constantly. They're insanely strong. You'll see them in the majority of your games. And you probably saw them a lot in the World Cup as well, but just very, very powerful. I'll briefly go through them. Lua, basically the best character in the game, permanently banned in RTA. Conquerorless, one of the best aggro units in the entire game, picked constantly as first pick. Mediator Quirk, easily the best cleanser in the game. Even though he has some weaknesses, overall he's still just the definitive cleanser that's picked non-stop by aggro or standard people all the time. MO Landy essentially is one of the most important meta characters in the entire game. Most of the meta revolves around whether she's picked or pre-banned, and a lot of characters on this list are actually moved up multiple tiers sometimes just because this character is so overwhelmingly powerful that the counters have to be moved up because they're used so much. Lionheart Sirmia, she is insanely good into Navy Captain Landy and Conqueror Liz. That's actually the main reason she's so high up. She is such a staple pick, constantly drafted, because both of these characters are in, I would say, 80 to 90% of any games that I see, so Lionheart Sirmia is picked basically equally as much, so I'd move her up about that high. Angel of Light Angelica, she's a staple, insanely strong pick. She's really good against a lot of characters that are AoE and stuff. She's actually decent against stuff like Lionheart Sirmia and Last Rider Crow as well, so just really important, powerful character. Last Rider Crow, I would actually say that he's kind of the top tank, and I'll compare him to some of the other tanks, but the main reason is he is so aggressive with his damage, and especially against MO Landy and with MO Landy, this aggression is just so powerful and the immunity is so strong. Sometimes you need that extra DPS push with characters like Lionheart Sirmia especially, for you to actually be able to take out some of these strong defensive teams. So I think he's kind of definitively the most used knight overall, especially in a lot of the aggressive teams. Zio, I would say, is one of the other definitive meta characters. I would say Zio and Navy Captain Landy are like kind of the meta right now, where most people's teams either revolve around picking Navy Captain Landy first or Zio first. Zio has made a whole slew of teams of picking like Zio with Aiden or Zio with Spectre Tenebria and then drafting a Peyra MO Rwana team, which has kind of taken over the entire meta, insanely powerful. And I would say the majority of people trying to climb to Emperor or even climbing around in Legend are spamming Zio non-stop. Spectre Tenebria, just really safe, strong pick. Obviously not as good into Navy Captain Landy and Lionheart. I would almost consider moving down to Great, but she's still such an important big pick, and she's picked all the time with characters like Zio. So I would say characters in Insane are pretty much characters that dictate this whole meta, insanely powerful. You might disagree or maybe want some of these other characters to be moved up, but these are the ones that I feel are the best. Next is Great. You might disagree with Apocalypse Robbie being Great rather than top tier, but I would say she actually has a significant amount of counters, even though she's picked constantly as a safe character. Many of the characters in Great or Insane are very strong into her, even though they're also strong with her. Architect Leica, one of the definitive first pick units where if you have speed advantage over your opponent, you're often picking Architect Leica into their team if they do not plan for it. Insanely powerful. Unbound Out Arrowwell. So this might be... A lot of people might disagree with this, but the reason why she's lower than someone like Last Rider Crow right now is I think you're favored for being either more offensive or just going more... like just overall aggro. Even characters like Yolha, I think, work a little bit better at the moment. Because Arrowwell is very defensive, which is great, but she's not especially good into Navy Captain Landy. She's not especially good into Conquerorless or Lua or Angel of Light or the Zio aggro teams or Peyra or even Briar Witch's Serias with effectiveness. So essentially, there's just a lot of characters that negate her escort, which I think is a really big deal. So I don't really like her as much, and also characters like him are aggressive, able to cause a lot of damage, and she's able to revenge kill units like Lionheart Sirmia and Navy Captain Landy, which also brings me to Yolha, that I think she's one of the top 3 knights. You saw her a lot in the World Cup. She's able to kill 2 of the most important units in the entire game that you see drafted non-stop, and she's constantly traded between players. I think that immediately makes her kind of a top contending tank pick. Then next, there's Peyra. Peyra is picked non-stop. She's one of the few options of dealing with stuff like Conqueror Lilius, etc. She's drafted all the time in aggressive teams. Just really, really powerful character, always used all the time, and she's in the popular Zeo teams as well. Briar she's one of the characters that are drafted all the time against Navy Captain Landy. Just overall really strong, really good in aggressive teams, has very few counters, even good in stuff like Emil Kowarik. Ocean Breeze Luluka is really good into these aggro teams, especially with Conqueror Lilius. Definitely one of the top support picks that people have been picking relatively early. It doesn't have a crazy amount of counters at the moment. Karina, definitely one of the best anti-aggro picks, just overall really strong unit. Sorry if you don't have her since she's a collab character. Wrecker and Rowana, a lot of people are going to disagree with this or think that she's bad, but she's essentially a whale unit. But she's less whaley now. She's used in the Zeo Peyra teams, which are taking over the entire meta. She kind of makes your opponent feel helpless unless they have a full team of anti-cleave immunity characters, which a lot of people do not have. And she kind of just crushes you. Savior Aiden. The reason she's not insane is you can only really pick her early when a character like Zeo is picked in your team. Otherwise, the opponent can go aggressive and there's plenty of counters to her. But when you're picking aggressively with stuff like Zeo, she's obviously completely insane and she's able to fight a lot of things toe-to-toe. But she's not even especially good into stuff like Navy Captain Landy or like Lionheart or Briar Witch or Spectre. So I think she has some weaknesses. Destina is one of the best cleansers in the game. Also really good versus Cleave, just solid unit overall. Belian, also good versus Cleave, always a staple. Always something that these soul users have to consider, right? Especially Spectre Tenebria pickers. Dark Corvus, he is single-handedly here, I would say. Just because he's able to kill Navy Captain Landy and Lionheart. I would say there's not really much other reason for him to be here, but these characters are so powerful and so heavily used that he kind of single-handedly becomes a good unit because of that, because you're going to fight them all the time. Although you pick him at the end of the draft. Let me move Lethe up here. This isn't in any particular order, but the reason why Lethe is here is she's essentially the same exact thing. Usually pick them at the end of the draft, and they're just pretty solid characters. Solitaria. So she's like one of the premier debuffers, super disgusting unit. She solos games sometimes if you're lucky. Just total RNG. She has weaknesses like Angel of Light and stuff, and can not be good into Lionheart sometimes. But she also can just solo carry the whole match by stunning their entire team every turn and just landing mischance. Really OP character. I don't think anyone really likes to fight against them. It also beats Ocean Breeze Luca. Jacko, one of the premier Cleave units used with Zeo and Peyra and Ran and all those friends. Just insta one-shot somebody. Definitely one of the top aggro characters. Well, mainly Cleave. Lone Crescent Bologna, mainly here just to deal with Navy Captain Landy. Every character that can actually deal with Navy Captain Landy has moved up so high because of how popular she is. So she definitely is in the great tier, and she can really pop off when protected well with a good team. Ran, also one of the good Cleave characters picked non-stop with Zeo. I see him all the time when people are going hardcore Cleave. He's always consistently decent, right? Even into so many characters that counter him. Sharoon, they're one of the characters that are actually able to deal with Mediator Kowarik, which makes her immediately really good. She also puts on constant injury. She can be a good late pick or even a good earlier pick a lot of the time. And she's able to deal with characters like Apocalypse Robbie, even Yolha. She's able to control so many characters. She can be like a one-person control team, and the injury is so strong against any health scaler in the entire game as well. So I actually really like them a lot, and they put so many buffs on your DPS too that she's really good. Strays, he's kind of similar to Leica, not as good, but he's definitely in the same vein. People pick them together, just insta-kill a fourth-year team, really good character. You usually have to pick something that directly contests them in your draft, or if you're going second pick, you'll get run over by this combo. Zahhak, so I have him in great because he's easier to build than some of the other characters that are able to deal with evasion. He can be built really fast, really easy because he only needs 50% crit chance. He's also a green unit, so he's okay into Peyra and Ran, which I think gives him a lot more usability, and he's able to cleanse an ally. Just a good anti-evasion character. Then, now we move into good tier. So these are characters that, I think they're strong, but you're not going to be picking them as much. Essentially, insane tier are the characters you're going to see in most of the matches you play. They're either going to be picked or pre-banned in a majority of the matches of of everyone's level, really. The great tier is mainly more characters you're going to see a lot of with them or against them, but they're not the characters people are first picking as much. Good tier, however, these are characters that they're solid, but they're a little less used. You're not going to see them as much, but they're still decent characters that a lot of people will round out their drafts with. So you have characters like Ambitious Tywin that can round out a draft sometimes, or be used when Last Rider Crow is pre-banned. A lot of people actually pick Mediator Cleric and then like pre-ban Last Rider Crow, and then they can use that. Well, not a lot, but it's a possibility, and it sees a decent amount of play. Ahmed, insanely good aggro unit. She sees a little less play right now, but she was part of a super popular Ahmed, Spectre Tenebria, Destina combo team that was running rampant on the ladder. Last Feast Karin is essentially harder to gear than Zahhak and does the same thing, but she's also worse versus characters like Ran, and she's not a green unit and not able to cleanse an ally. Shu sees a lot of less play, but you're going to see a lot more of her at lower levels of play. She's a good character overall, but she's just not especially good in this current meta that we're in, even though she's a solid character. Desert Jewel Basar, this is for players that generally are more technical and really know what they're doing, but she can be drafted in certain teams with Payro to protect them as well, especially against stuff like Zeo possibly. But you don't see him as much, but he's just a solid character, and he's also one of the few cleansers that gives immunity to the entire team. Designer Lilibet, decent versus some aggro, versus some cleave, just a solid character overall. Not really used as heavily though. Edward moved down more recently because a lot of the time you pick Edward, he just fails. He's not good into some of these meta units. He's not very good into Landy. He's not good into evasion. He sometimes gets overloaded with too many debuffs. He's not really good into a lot of the cleave and aggro teams. You usually have to pick him in conjunction with a bunch of other stuff to have him work. He only really works when the opponent is too overly invested in debuffs. But even sometimes then he gets overwhelmed. Politica, I would almost move her down. She's countered by a lot of the meta. She's not good into Payra, she's not good into the Zeo Rowana combo, she's not good into Navy Captain Landy, she's not good into Conquer Lilius or Lua. She's kind of just a bit weak, only really works when the opponent's drafting slower. Pirate Captain Flan overwhelms people who don't have good cleanses. If you pick Mediator Cleric and then you pick Pirate Captain Flan, a lot of people struggle to actually deal with cleansing the debuffs since she can stun almost every debuffer in the entire game. Remnant Violet, often picked in really aggro teams with characters like Conqueror Lilius. Just really strong character overall when picked near the end of a draft, and really hard to fight for honest characters as well.
Hi, Jenna.
Hi, Jenna. Hey, what's up? Senya, she's a good anti-cleave. She's also able to fight against some stuff like Navy Captain Landy, so she's just a solid character to have. Shuna is like baby Angel of Light, but she's also a cleanser, so she has some more flexibility, which makes her really nice. So she's a solid character. Summertime Assyria, she's here specifically just because she's picked as a late pick with some of these Rec Room Rwana Zeo drafts with Payra. She just works pretty well since you have 2 AoEs every single time and can help disable a lot of the counters that work into that team. Inferno Quazu is here because he can work against Navy Captain Landy. However, he can be a bit risky, which is why I have him lower. You also usually need Tachi, which is kind of a pay-to-win artifact, for him to truly work. And even then, sometimes the opponent can counter him, or he just won't really work that amazingly. So he can be a bit awkward. T-Surin is one of the few DPS that doesn't really care about debuffs that much because she can self-cleanse. And it's just also good into characters that are really honest, like Apocalypse Ravi and Spectre, which are just, you know, damage with no tricks, and she can work really well. Sid is here, even though speed imprints aren't that amazing right now because Zeo is so popular, he's still just like a pretty decent character that works with some cleave. Now we're in the niche tier. I mean, as the name suggests, these are characters that, like, they totally are usable, but you're not really going to see them as much, or they just don't have as much effectiveness. I'm going to more briefly go through these characters. Emilia's like a decent cleanser. I've actually used her an okay amount. Fairy Tale Tenebria is really good into teams near the end of a draft. She also completely wrecks Angel of Light teams. If the opponent doesn't draft fast and they draft slower with stuff like Angel of Light, she can actually tear them apart. Really good late pick into those. Abigail can be okay into some cleave teams when protecting really high priority units that the opponent has to deal with first, like let's say Karina or Designer Lilibet, or like Sage Belzazan or something, let's say. Alencia can be decent injury into some of these characters, such as like Apocalypse Ravi and stuff, or stripping buffs, but usually a late pick at the end of the draft. Rwana is okay into Navy Captain Landy teams, but she's kind of gimmicky. A lot of people might disagree with me here, but the honest truth, especially in high up RTA, is when you pick her, she's a Hail Mary RNG character, where if the opponent does not salvo enough with Navy Captain Landy and constantly push your team up, you probably lose, because you're on a timer to deal with Navy Captain Landy before she S3s or it's over. And you might say Rowan is an amazing counter into Navy Captain Landy, but usually it means that you already outdrafted your opponent if she works really well, or you got really lucky. Archdemon, she's like theoretically good into characters like Navy Captain Landy, but I think you usually have to outdraft your opponent to be able to pick her near the end of the draft. Same with Arya, but usually used in kind of aggressive teams, but can really just take control of an entire match, but also kind of a 5th pick unit. Same with units like Charlotte. A lot of these characters in niche are generally at the end of the draft. You might pick them as your 5th pick that kind of counters the opponent's team. Same with Bleh Tier, not as amazing in this meta. He was really good in the previous one with the high debuffs, but he is good against health scalers like Apocalypse Ravi and stuff, but he's kind of difficult to pick now since everyone's prepared for debuffs and expecting them. Paul and Cecilia, decent into some cleave teams, and there's not too many knights that are okay right now. Landy, I would maybe move her. You don't really see that much of her, but I guess if you're going a really aggressive Landy, they can still be alright into some teams that just don't have any reach for her. Lilius is theoretically okay into Lua, but I've seen her used a little bit, not even against Lua, and she can be alright. Her new EE that pushes her up is kind of nice as well. Little Queen Charlotte is used kind of rarely, but I've seen her versus some Emil Koeric and versus some Apocalypse Ravi teams where she's able to tear them apart, but she definitely requires a good amount of knowledge of the game and a specific type of draft. Not many made Chloe teams running around, so she's definitely lower ranked. Milim is sort of in the same vein where people would build her like bulky and counter set. I don't really see that much of her at the moment, but I feel like she's an okay character just overall, as long as they're not fighting really the Landy teams, right? Politis is actually not that good. I don't see much of her at all, but I don't think I can in good conscience put her in a lower tier because it's Politis after all, right? And she's still okay into Ahmed. Roy really moved down in this meta. He dies to too much of the RNG stuff. You can sometimes round out the end of your draft with a Roy, but it's much more difficult. Sage is decent versus some of the cleave teams if you build him like over 300 res, but he also has a lot of troubles. Commander Pavel is okay in some cleave, but not really that amazing overall. Vildred, speed imprints are not really that good, but he still is one of the better speed imprints. Let me just move Silk. She's kind of in the same boat. You don't really use much speed imprint because Zio is the most popular one, but sometimes Zio gets pre-banned. And that's when the speed imprints come into play. Bloodblade Karin, I've seen her a few times recently in some anti-cleave or cleavey type teams when you're a little bit squishy, and she can tear the team apart. She's like, okay. She's an alright character. A little more niche though, right? Infinite Horizon Acades we saw in the World Cup once, and she worked. And cleansers are good, but I don't think she's a super amazing cleanser. She's just kind of decent overall, I would say, as a whole. Crimson Armin, she's a decent tank because she gives so much mitigation for the team that can't be stripped like a character like Airwell, but generally just not as good as a character like Airwell. And a lot of characters have inbuilt mitigation in their builds or artifacts or other stuff like that, so sometimes it conflicts with her passive, so it feels like a waste. And she's not really good versus debuffs either. Just because like on buff 1, other stuff like that is popular, especially like Angel, Light, and Peyra. Troublemaker Crozet, decent versus some aggro or cleave, but he's very little usage overall, but he can do alright into that. Stone Sage Vivian, I struggled to decide whether to put her in niche or Bleh. I think in this particular meta right now as we speak, she's terrible. But she was amazingly good in a previous meta not too long ago, like really recent. So like before she was in great, now she's in like maybe Bleh. But she's really not that amazing just overall. Just too many counters on the ladder, so many characters counter her, and just the entire meta doesn't favor her. Summerbreak Charlotte is sort of similar. You don't see her as much, but she was a decent cleave character that could be comboed in conjunction with stuff like Zio and some of these fast-paced like Peyra, Ran teams, stuff like that. And she did really well. Now, the characters in the Bleh tier, I have them here because I think they are usable in RTA, but I don't think that they are very good. I'm not even really going to explain all the characters, but I mean, like a couple notes is I would say like Reeg's okay. Like he's usable, but not really amazing is how I feel at the moment, but he's not usable in RTA yet. Mort is like, he's kind of gimmicky. Like you could draft these characters rarely, but very, very rarely, I'd say. Character like Selene, she's kind of just a huge gimmick. I think that the higher ranked you go, the worse she is. So how good Selene is to you is usually indicative of how high ranked you are normally. And then characters like Ida have really gone down lower. I would maybe move her up to niche, but just meh overall. And I think for the rest, like Maid Chloe teams have dropped down really far. I wouldn't say they've dropped this far, but if you're not a Maid Chloe user, like you don't build a whole team around her, then she's definitely not that amazing. And I think most of these other ones is how I feel about the characters. I just don't really think that they're all that amazing right now, and I don't really recommend people use them most of the time. These are definitely characters you would build near the end, right? You would build most of these other characters, then maybe build some of these. And then the characters in Garbaggio here they're just bad. I'm gonna be real with you. You might disagree and say Arunka's my waifu. Well, newsflash, your waifu's kind of trash, sorry. This is RTA, this isn't Guild War, okay? I'm sorry. Characters like Benimaru, if you fight against good players, you're gonna lose. He is kind of trash in RTA. I'm sorry if he works in your Guild War, I'm sorry if you like him. He's not very good in RTA against a player that actually knows what they're doing. A lot of these characters in Garbaggio, I think they're bad. And I've seen a lot of people say Martial Artist Ken is good against Landy. Your opponent literally has to auto the match, so I think only Guild War he could work, otherwise no way. But some people are doing this really gimmicky full cleave Martial Artist Ken. I actually saw it on the first day when Landy came out. You build full damage Martial Artist Ken with Ahmed, because he always crits. But that's like it. He's pretty gimmicky. And I think that's about it. I think that's essentially my entire tier list, and this is how I feel. You might totally disagree with all these, and that's fine, but I would say I'm probably like 90% correct on most of these, at least. And the higher up my list you go, I would say the more correct I am. You probably more disagree with the stuff lower down. But I would say I have a lot of experience with this game, and I would say a lot of people probably agree with this list at higher levels overall, right? I am having a great day, thank you. And yeah, that's about it for this tier list video. I hope this helped or give you some insight. This is kind of post-mortem to this season, essentially, because this is the very end of the season, but I would say this is kind of how the standings ended. The end of the Valorous season, probably considered one of the most RNG and worst seasons by a lot of people, including me. Not a huge fan of it. I'm just glad that it's finally over, and I really hope that all these tiers shift. Maybe I'll make another one of these lists next time we see the meta do a giant shift, maybe with some new characters or something. Anyways, that's a bit about it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you next time.